I'm getting into the habit of introducing people. I'd like to introduce someone. Dr. Beverly Langford. She can talk to us about business etiquette when we read her bio. So Dr. Langford serves as a program coordinator for the business communication programs in the Department of Marketing. Has been involved in the business communication program for the Robinson College of Business since its early development. She participated in developing strategies and courses for the initiative and designed both undergraduate and graduate courses that she also teaches. Beverly is the author of Etiquette, the Unspoken Rules for Business Success. She also co-author of Communication Skills and Strategies, Guidelines for Managers at Work. She's president of an Atlanta-based corporate communications consulting firm whose clients include Southern Company, St. Joseph's Hospital. So, Dr. Langford.
Good afternoon. I feel like I know you already because I will be with you on Wednesday when we talk about emotional intelligence. So I've been the one who's been, after you've taken the assessment, I'm the one who gets the email that says, this person has taken it, and I go in and score it and download it. So your names are familiar to me, and I'm delighted to be with you. Finally, I've been looking forward to this. I also, he told you that I was the author of a book on etiquette. I'm going to tell you a little more about that in a few minutes. But I also have a little quiz for you. It's not going to be graded, but whoever does the best is going to get a copy of my book. You may decide that that's not really a prize. You might think that's more punishment than a prize. But anyway, I'm going to give this out, and you can kind of look at it as we talk, and you don't have to do it all at once. You can kind of fill things in as we talk about it, and we'll discuss some of them some of the things at the end of our time together. I have also handed out the PowerPoint slides that we're going to be using. Now, let me tell you one thing. Thank you. Anybody missing one? I've got a couple left over. Let me tell you a couple of things about my slides. My students always don't know whether to like this or not like it. But I will show you some slides on the screen that you don't have on the slides that I handed you to. I mean, I have to have some surprises, right? Or all you do is just read the slides and go home. So I have to give you some extras up here on the screen. So if you're following along with the slides, and that's not this page, it's the other booklet that I gave out. Did everybody get, yeah, you got that. If you're following along and a slide is missing, that's by design. And so don't worry about it. It's just something that I may be adding that I want to talk about. The other thing is that I teach primarily in the graduate department. I teach in the professional MBA program. Would you like one of these? I teach in the professional MBA program. There should be another one of these. Here, got this as well. And one of the things that I like to do is to make my classes very interactive. So I want your thoughts. You can learn as much from each other, and I can learn as much from you as anybody's going to be learning from me. So I'd love to hear your thoughts and your participation on what we're going to be doing today. Okay, so the first thing is, let me ask you this. When you see the word etiquette, what comes to your mind? What's that?
Do's and don'ts.
Do's and don'ts. Okay, what else? Pardon? Manners. All right, anything else?
Conventional norms.
Conventional norms. That's a great way to put it. Right. Is that, no one unilaterally came up with rules of etiquette. They were things that people decided over the years would help us interact more effectively as human beings. Now, the problem is that a lot of times, as years passed, function becomes form. What started out as a real function really doesn't have any meaning anymore, and some of it we just hang on to just because it's tradition. Some of those things I think we can put aside. For example, have you ever thought about why for years and years, I don't think anybody pays much attention to it anymore, but why did, when you're walking down the street, if a man and a woman are walking down the street together, why did the man always walk on the outside? Does anybody know why? From what?
Cars.
Well, it wasn't cars when it first started. From the horse and carriages, and of course the streets weren't paved. And women in a lot of places wore long skirts. And so when the horse and carriage went by, the horse kicked up a bunch of mud if it was raining, or a lot of dust if it wasn't, and it got on her skirt. And it wasn't like run to the dry cleaners back then. In most cases, in fact, hundreds of years ago, you just wore your clothes till they were so dirty you just threw them away, because unless you could wash them. So that was a rule that really no longer has any function. So it doesn't matter what side of the street you walk on, as it did once, but there was a reason for it. But a lot of times I think we think of etiquette as being a bunch of really stuffy rules and regulations. In fact, when I wrote my book on business behavior and professionalism, the publisher decided that he wanted to know, and it was the Amicom out of New York, and he decided, or she decided, that it was actually a committee, that they would name it the Etiquette Edge. And when they called me and told me, first of all, I thought the author got to pick a title. I was wrong. I had written the book, but they picked the title. And so when they called and said it was the Etiquette Edge, that's what they had decided for the title, I said, wait a minute. This is not a book about which fork to use. And I am not Miss Manners. This is really a book about communication. It's about how do you conduct yourself in a way that's going to get you ahead in the world, that's going to get you ahead as a business person. And I thought I made a very good case, and they ignored me completely. And they said, well, we're still going to call it the Etiquette Edge, but they did give me a subtitle, which they added, The Unspoken Rules for Business Success. And a lot of it is unspoken, because you're not always going to have anyone say, you didn't handle that well. Maybe your boss might, but in a lot of cases, people will just think you didn't handle that well and not really say anything to you about it. The word etiquette comes from a French word which means ticket. And if you think about it, what does a ticket do? It gives you access, absolutely. It gives you access, and if you don't have one, what happens? It can keep you out. And that's really what happens, is a lot of times these so-called rules, just knowing about them are ways to get you in. They're ways to give you extra access. And eventually, what we hope is it puts you in the C-suite. You know, you're at the very top because you have the ticket, which is just a general knowledge of appropriate behavior. And another reason, now when I say appropriate behavior, I'm using that very broadly, because as we all know, behavior varies across culture. And so there is no one hard, fast, okay, this is the only definition of appropriate behavior. We're going to be talking in broad terms this afternoon. But appropriate behavior within the context of wherever you are and what you're trying to accomplish, that it really can give you that extra edge, that extra access to those things that are important. In today's climate, however, rudeness seems to be on the rise. Have you noticed that, particularly when you're in an airport or when you're in a crowded situation? People push and shove and people cut you off in traffic. And there seems to be a lack of just courtesy to each other. Why do you think that is? What are some of the reasons that you think that rudeness is on the rise?
Selfishness.
Yeah, we kind of, over the years, we've developed a culture of you got to look after number one. You know, you got, if you don't, nobody else will kind of attitude. Anything else? What are some other things? What's that? Pardon? Frustration? Yeah, stress. Absolutely. When you're stressed, little things become big things. I think that certainly is one of the reasons. And another reason that this is my theory, and you may decide it doesn't hold water, but my theory is a lot of it is as we live in these large urban areas, we have an increased anonymity. We see people every day we're never going to see again for the rest of our lives. I grew up in a town of 2,500 people, and if I misbehaved, it was about 15 minutes before my mother knew about it. And there was a big problem. Because particularly one of her best friends called her and said, I saw Beverly doing such and such, and I just thought you needed to know. So, did any of you grow up in those kinds of situations in a community? I mean, there can even be communities within large cities. And so, Mom knew in a hurry when I was misbehaving. And so it really made me very mindful of how I needed to conduct myself. I wasn't just representing myself. I was representing my family. I was representing more than that. And so to me, because I wasn't naturally a really good person. I got in trouble all the time. And yet there was always that check and balance that made me think twice about things. But when you grow up in a big city or you move around a lot, you don't have that anchor that says you better behave yourself because. And then, as you said, one professor whose book I use in my graduate class coined the term desk rage, like road rage, that in companies where there's a lot of stress, there's a lot of frustration, as you said, and people just get very tense, and they end up with this rudeness spilling out into the workplace. And that's really what we're focusing on today. We're going to be talking about behavior in the workplace. We're not talking about personal relationships or anything like that. And then as we become more diverse, as we become more intercultural, we have behaviors that may be misunderstood or that we can't quite figure out, and we may be totally innocent in what we're doing. Several years ago, I taught at the University of Cairo, actually on 3 different occasions. I had the opportunity to go to Egypt and teach at the University of Cairo. And one of the things that a very simple thing that I read when I was studying the culture of the Middle East was about hand gestures, because they really vary across cultures. And I'm sure you're aware of this because you come from different cultures. But I realized that what I read was that if in the United States, if I want you to come over here and talk to me about something, what do I do? Come on over here. Tell me what's your name. Capilego? Capilego, come over here and talk to me. Do you know in some parts of the world that is an obscene gesture? That is something that if I did that to someone, that person would misunderstand what I meant. So in that part of the world, if I wanted you to come over, I would do this. I would put palm down, put the back of my hand up. Well, if you don't know that, then obviously there are all kinds of opportunities for this business of misunderstanding and misinterpretation. And the more we know about each other, the more we talk to each other, the more we understand, the better. One of the things that caused me to write the book that ended up being an etiquette book was a study that was done at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And it was on rudeness in the workplace, uncivil, or incivility as they called it. And they said that it manifests itself by things like this, or people interpret it as somebody who won't answer my emails, somebody who interrupts me or talks about me behind my back in a denigrating way, someone who raises his voice or hers. I don't want to make it sound like it's just the guys who do that. And rudeness that even can escalate into actual violence. We're talking about the workplace now. We're not talking about just everyday doing in a social situation. And so these two professors interviewed 1,400 workers. And I want you to look at the results. They're fairly remarkable. 12% of the people who, now this was in, I believe, in 2000, so the economy wasn't quite as tight as it is now. People could leave jobs more easily and get another job than perhaps they can today. But 12% of the people who were interviewed had actually left a job because of rudeness. But it's important, if you're going to be, as you move forward in a successful career, if you're going to be managing people and the world economy gets better, think about, there may be people you don't want to lose, that 12% who left because of the way, the atmosphere in which they operated. 22% said, well, I couldn't afford to leave the job, but I certainly didn't give it 100%. I didn't work hard at it because I didn't feel any loyalty particularly to this organization. Have you ever felt like that? That, you know, that you just really don't, you're not excited, you're not engaged about what you're doing. And interestingly, notice that men are 7 times more likely to be rude at work than women. Now, I think that's debatable. I think women just can be rude in different ways. You know, it may not be as obvious, but I don't think it means that women are necessarily any nicer than men when it comes to rudeness. I'll let you all decide that. And then rampant incivility. We're not talking about political correctness. We're talking about out-and-out rudeness. And then James O'Rourke, who teaches at the University of Notre Dame, shared this survey from a company called Integra Realty Resources. And look what they said. Almost half of the people, and I think it was almost 1,800 people surveyed, and they were, actually it was 1,300, 18 years old and over. Almost half had actually witnessed verbal abuse in the workplace, and unfortunately almost a third of them had yelled at coworkers themselves. And I don't think that people set out to do this. I think this goes back to your point, tell me, Gilbert, I think it goes back to what you said about frustration and stress and so forth. Now, there was a great article written some years ago by a British public relations firm, and they quoted some just everyday employees about how they reacted, that my immediate manager's rude and abusive to his colleagues. The title of this article was called Business Behaving Badly. And another one said, the language and attitude among managers in my company are awful. Another one said, 3 bosses arrived. They didn't introduce themselves. They didn't really seem to interact at all. My boss is a bully. Anybody ever worked for a bully? There's a lot about bullying in the news today. How would you define a bully? What's a bully? We'll talk about this some when we talk about emotional intelligence, but how would you define someone who's a bully?
Like someone who picks on others just to feel better about himself or herself?
Right. And usually what's the difference in a bully and just a really tough manager? What's the big difference?
A bully may do it, a bully's not going to do it to like better you, whereas a tough manager is going to try to make you better.
Right, that's great. That's a great observation. Anything else? What's the difference in a bully and just a tough manager? Yes?
A bully is out to intimidate versus a manager is out to inspire you to do your best.
Get results. You know, he may be really tough because things aren't going well and you just lost your biggest account or your biggest client or something like that. Anything else about the difference in a bully? Those are both absolutely right on target. Anything else about the difference in a bully and a tough manager?
The bully might be telling a lie.
What's that?
The bully might be telling a lie.
He certainly might. He certainly may be just plain dishonest. Let me tell you the big difference to always be on the lookout for. Bullies pick on certain people. bullies, a tough manager is going to be consistent. He's going to be, there was a very successful football coach in the NFL many years ago by the name of Vince Lombardi. Has anybody ever heard of Vince Lombardi? Well, you know, he was the coach of the Green Bay Packers for a long time and won lots of some of the early Super Bowls. One of his players said, he's equal opportunity. He treats us all like dirt. And so he was very, very tough. He says that winning isn't, what did he say? Winning isn't everything, it's the only thing. Right. And so, but that was a tough manager. He was fair. He didn't pick on certain people. He didn't play favorites. Bullies play favorites. They pick on people they think will let them get away with it. If you've ever seen anybody stand up to a bully, usually the bully's got to go find somebody else to pick on. So that's the big difference there. Tracy Fuller from an organization called the Creative Group says, part of what you're talking about, says neglected manners may be the unfortunate byproduct of a workforce stretched thin. I don't buy that 100%. I believe that it is a contributor, but I also think that you can do something about it and you don't have to succumb to it. In fact, a company's values, look at this one, the values are more meaningful if managers will adapt and adopt what people are expecting. Eric Hoffer said that rudeness is a weak man's imitation of strength. And a lot of times, the person who is civil, who is courteous, comes across as much stronger in the long run than the person who wants to be the tough guy. So why is courtesy a component of leadership? Why do you think it's part of, why do you think that that is a part of leadership?
It gives something for people to respect.
Yes.
To provide for giving reason to respect them.
Right. It really adds to your ability to be respected. And it helps you build solid relationships. Let's think about what it is that creates a solid working relationship. Before, don't look at your slides yet. What do you think create a solid working relationship? What things? Oh, well, you've certainly got to communicate, but what has to happen before you're comfortable communicating with somebody? You have to trust, because trust makes you feel safe and makes you open up. So you're absolutely right. It starts with trust, and it's trust of your character, but also trust of your competence, that you trust someone to be a good person and do a good job. They may be a good person, but they may be awful at what they do. So you've got to have both of those. Now, when you and I trust each other, what's going to happen? I'm going to share some things about myself. You're going to tell me some things about yourself. And what does that lead to?
Friendship.
What do you think that leads to?
A friendship.
Yes.
We feel to share information.
All right, well, and when we share information, what happens? Yes.
It leads to a solid relationship between the two of them.
Well, it leads to a better relationship. But just on a basic level, what does it do?
Friendship.
Okay. Why do they get done? Because what? We understand each other. And the more we find out about each other, the more we understand each other. And when you and I understand each other, what does that lead to? I mean, we may not be exactly alike. You may think, gosh, I can't believe how she reacted to that situation. But I understand why she did it, and so therefore I can accept. Yes, absolutely. So understanding leads to acceptance, which then leads to respect. And when we respect people, we're just going to treat them better. You're not going to be rude to anybody or uncivil to anybody for whom you have a lot of respect. And then who said it enables you to get things done? That's really what it's all about. when you have this solid relationship, you can get things done. Have you ever been in a situation where at work you really didn't like somebody? That you really just, maybe even you didn't dislike them all that much personally, but you just weren't comfortable around them. Have you ever been in a situation like that?
Yeah.
And what do? You avoid them?
You can't, if you can, as much as you can.
Uh-huh.
But the person is your boss, so, yeah.
Yeah, and so you go home at night and you stew about it, and you tell people about it. God, I hate my boss, or I really hate my, or I hate my coworker, and what I'm getting at is it takes up a lot of energy. It wastes a lot of your energy, and what could you be doing with that energy? Working, exactly. You could be getting a lot done instead of spending time, as my mother used to say, stewing over something that is a problem. And so that's why if you have the solid working relationship, your energy is going in the right direction. Your energy is helping you get things done. You notice here, I didn't say anything about being best friends. You can have a solid working relationship with someone you really don't want to go spend 2 weeks in the Bahamas with. You are completely happy to see them go home at night. But when you're here working together, it's productive, and you respect each other and you understand each other. And that's why it's so important to develop those good relationships. And we're going to talk about that when we talk about emotional intelligence. People volunteer exceptional results, and that is why the solid working relationship is so important. You know, we can command acceptable results. Somebody can say to me, Beverly, if you don't teach 2 classes a semester and do A, B, and C, you're going to lose your job here at Georgia State. So what will they get from me with that kind of attitude?
Just what they asked for.
They'll get 2 classes in A, B, and C. They can command that. That's part of my job description. You can command compliance. You cannot command commitment. If you're going to be committed, and commitment is where the exceptional results happen. And commitment, remember this is one of the things I'd like for you to take away. Commitment is always a choice. You can't command somebody to be committed. Oh, you hear people say, at this company, we demand 100% commitment. You may say that, but that's not happening. Is it? You've got to, commitment, if I'm going to be committed, I choose to commit, because commitment is going that extra mile. And if I choose to do it, that's when the really outstanding things happen. And you're not going to do that, you're not going to have that happen in a toxic atmosphere where people are mad at each other, or they don't respect each other, or they don't treat each other right. And in fact, when you become in a situation, you may already be there, but when you come to a situation where you have to lead other people, know that there's one thing to keep in mind about leading, is that as a leader, you're going to have to serve the people you lead. You take care of their needs. You make sure they have the resources that they need. You make sure they have the support that they need. You make sure they have the coaching that they need. And if you don't, when you stop serving them, they stop empowering you. You may still have the title of leader, but it's going to be a positional power, not personal power. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. What do you think? You think about somebody who you follow because they've got a title, like you said about the boss. If that person wasn't the boss, you wouldn't follow him across the street to the sub shop. But if there are people who don't even have titles in your workplace or in your community, and yet you respect them and you would follow them under just about any circumstances because they have personal power. And ideally, if you're going to be really successful, you want both. I'm not saying that you shouldn't strive for the positions, certainly. It's good to be ambitious. But you need to make sure that you're also developing that personal power. We're going to talk about this a lot more next on Wednesday, because Daniel Goleman is one of the founding fathers of emotional intelligence, of the whole idea of EQ that runs along with IQ. But Goleman says that leadership starts with self-awareness, but one of the important components is social awareness. Are you good at interacting with people in a way that creates strong relationships? And that's really what this whole idea of etiquette and courtesy are about. It's all about what are some ways that we interact with people in a way that allows us to spend our energy on getting things done. One of the interesting things about leadership is that other people decide what our leadership style is. It's just like other people decide what our credibility is. And so it's very important. That's why it's all about these relationships. So everybody's got a professional image or not. And if you don't have an idea of what you want your professional image to be, guess what? What's going to happen? Others are going to create it for you, absolutely. And so what's really important is that you figure out and think about this intentionally, how you want to be seen through other people. What are the big differentiators? What about you do you want people to notice? Are you, obviously you're all really smart or you wouldn't be in the field that you're in. So you certainly have a high IQ and you're good at solving problems and you probably have all of these things. But it's good for you to think about what are these real strengths that you have so that you can position yourself. When I wrote my book, I ran into another book by a woman named Catherine Caputa. And she said that visibility and being seen in a positive way can make the difference between your success and less success. One of my students, a couple of semesters ago in the professional MBA program, told a story that I think that really talks about why courtesy and civility and relationship management are so important. His name was Greg. And Greg got up to do his presentation in my class. And his theme was how to get noticed without being notorious. And here's the story that Greg told. He said that when he graduated from the University of Florida a number of years ago, he graduated with a degree in engineering. And he was number 4 in his class in the whole school of engineering. So he felt really good about himself. He moved to Atlanta. He got a job. This is in the late 90s that he was when he finished undergraduate school. And he said that he got a job with a real up-and-coming engineering firm. And he said that he was really pleased that he had his job. He really thought he had made a huge accomplishments to get it. And he said that there were 7 engineers in the department. And he really felt like that he was probably the smartest of all of them. And so he worked really hard. He said that he worked long hours and he did all the things he solved the problems and did all the work. Then the economy hit a little bump in the road and his company that he was working for got in trouble financially. And he said they decided that they were going to have to drastically cut back on their head count. And his department was one of them. He said that they laid off 6 of the 7 engineers. And he was one of the ones that got laid off. He said he couldn't believe it. And he really couldn't believe it when he saw the one they kept. Because he thought he was so superior to that person. And he started trying to figure out why of 7 engineers, they got rid of 6 and kept this one. So he just kind of started asking around and trying to look at the situation. There was a little time before his job actually ended. And he said, I figured out that the reason they kept him is because everybody knew him. He said he had made it a point to get to know people, not just in our department, but in other departments. And he said, I don't mean that he was running around sucking up to people. He was genuinely interested in what they did, in the jobs that they did. He wanted to learn what was going on in other departments. He wanted to know how what that department did dovetailed with what his department did, how his job affected someone else's job. And when it came time to cut the head count, everybody said, I don't know who we're going to cut, but we're going to keep this guy. He said that was a huge revelation to me, that working hard was not enough. It's important, it's critical, but it wasn't enough. He said, I promise I will never make that mistake ever again in my life. That I will overlook the part of working with people that involves the managing relationships and taking the extra time to get to know people. But you do want the right kind of visibility. Does anybody know who this is?
Dennis Rodman.
It's Dennis, yes. And Dennis has a real wide variety in his wardrobe, including wedding dresses. Obviously, he can get away with it. He's enormously talented. He kind of does his own thing. But most of us can't wear a wedding dress to work. Most of us need to figure out how we're going to get noticed without being quite in the same way and being quite that visible, because it doesn't work for everybody. So why does it matter that we get noticed and that we behave in such a way that we get noticed in the right way? Well, things are moving very fast. Structures are enormously complex now. There's a lot of diversity, as we talked about. I cannot put in my graduate classes. It has probably been 10 years since I taught a class where everybody in the class started his or her life speaking English. For over half of my class last semester, English was not their first language. And so coming from lots of different parts of the world with a lot of different experiences and resources. And so that enriches us all. It enriches our workplace, but sometimes it takes a little extra effort to form those relationships and to create that understanding and acceptance that we were talking about. So what do you think professional behavior means? And I like to think about that more than just business etiquette. What do you think? How would you define professional behavior? What are some things that if you were judging someone on whether they were professional or not, what are some of the things you'd look for?
Showing up to work on time.
Okay, punctuality, even though that does vary across the world. It does. When I taught in Egypt, the first morning that I was there, the class was supposed to start at 9 o'clock. And at 9 o'clock, no one was there. At 9:15, 3 people were there out of a class of 30. About 9:25, I had about a third of the class, and it was a little after 10 before everybody got there. And I noticed that nobody apologized. Nobody said, oh gosh, I'm sorry, I'm late. They just walked in, hi, how are you? And so about when we did our first break, I said, did I make a mistake here? Did I get the wrong time? And this woman laughed and she said, you just need to get used to Egyptian time. And I said, tell me what Egyptian time is. And she said, anything within about an hour is considered fine. Well, this was a joint MBA program where they did half of their class at the University of Cairo and half of it over here. And I said, well, let me just give you a little tip. When you come to Georgia State and the class starts at a certain time, I think it'd be a good idea for you to be here at that whatever time it's supposed to be. But even though punctuality, in this country, we look at punctuality as meaning I'm interested, I'm responsible, all of those things. But it does vary across the world, but you're absolutely right. What else is professional? Pardon? Dressing appropriately. It doesn't mean we have to dress the same way all the time, but appropriately is the key word. Sometimes it's fine if you've got a casual dress down day, that's fine. If you're going to be making a presentation to the CEO of your client company, that's another thing. So appropriate dress, absolutely. Anything else? Yes?
Being ethical.
Pardon?
Being ethical. Ethical.
Ethical, yes, absolutely. Being ethical, operating with integrity, yes, absolutely. This was what I did, just Googled some on the internet and pulled these together about what are the top unprofessional behaviors. Inappropriate dress, amazingly, ended up number 1. And one of the reasons is that whether it's fair or not, we make snap judgments about each other because we don't have the time to get to know each other. We don't have a lifetime to form relationships. We make very quick decisions about people. And so appropriate dress is important. Unprofessional, profane, or abusive language was number 2. Obviously, profanity is a lot more accepted than it was when I was growing up, but there's still places that probably isn't a good idea. And I would always, if you're not sure, be careful. Habits that inconvenience others, that would go back to the being on time, is that it inconveniences other people if you are not there and they are. And accessibility when others need you. Not responding to emails, not returning phone calls, not being available when people need you. Just generally showing disrespect for other people is, and you can interpret that however you choose, but, and letting personal issues affect your professional life. We all struggle with that. We all struggle with this balance between life and work and family and all of those things. But remember, everybody has personal issues. One of the things I do is I work with the teams in our cohorting programs that have teams that stay together all during their time together. And I can remember one of the most toxic discussion among a team that was having problems was over this very same thing. It was 2 things. They were working on a big project and one of their team members had disappeared. They couldn't reach her by email, they couldn't reach her on the phone, they couldn't reach her by text. And when they finally found her after they had already done the project, she said she had personal issues. And my response to that is, so do we all. And at the very least, you at least say, I've had some sort of crisis, I can't respond yet. But that becomes a real unprofessional, and particularly if you're someone who constantly has personal issues, it's going to eventually start to affect your credibility with people who are in decision-making personality. Letting personality clashes get in the way of your work. You're not going to get along equally well with everybody. There are going to be some people who just plain rub you the wrong way, and we all have that. But letting that escalate and boil up to where it's a real problem, be careful about it, figure out a way. And one of the chapters in my book is on how to get along with your manager. And sometimes it's just personality differences, like he's a morning person and I'm an afternoon person. Or he likes to come in late and stay late, and you're someone who needs to come in early and leave early. I mean, just simple things like that can create personality clashes. So those are just a few of them. How many of you have ever heard of Peter Drucker? You're all a lot younger. Peter Drucker died, I think, in the late 90s at the advanced age of something like 96. But Peter Drucker is probably the father of American management theory. He was one of the first people to write about what it means to be an effective manager. In the 60s, he wrote a book called The Effective Executive that I would say even today still has great content for anyone who plans to manage other people. And you see what he said. manners are so important because they actually make it possible for us to work together. So that's why courtesy becomes an important issue. So why aren't we courteous? What do you think is the reason? You said frustration? What else?
Your upbringing.
What's that?
Your upbringing.
Your upbringing? Here's one I hear a lot, particularly from women. If I'm nice, courtesy being their nice being their definition of courtesy. If I'm nice, people are going to run all over me. Courtesy doesn't mean being a doormat. Courtesy doesn't mean letting people run over you. You can be very firm and still do it in absolutely a courteous way. And if you're going to be a leader, you got to be tough. Now, those are some of the conventional wisdoms out there that a lot of times I think we think about. But incivility in the workplace carries a heavy cost. For one thing, people now will not take it the way they once did. They'll sue you. Or they just won't be committed. One of the big issues now in organizations, particularly with the economy the way it is this whole idea of employee disengagement, meaning that I'm still here, but I'm not working very hard. In fact, I read a book last year called I Quit, But I Forgot to Tell You. And what it's about is people who are still on the job, but they're really not. They're disengaged, they're not committed to the organization. So they find a lot of reasons to be absent. They find a lot of days that they just feel bad. Or they come in late. Sometimes it goes the other way. You wish they wouldn't be there because they actually, you see in baseball games, people are always hitting the water cooler. Any of you baseball fans? Nobody's a baseball fan? Well, we were playing the Marlins the other night, and one of I think their second baseman got mad and slammed the water cooler and did something to his hand so he couldn't play for a week. And generally, low morale. And here's another important thing. In your work, you'll be dealing a lot with clients, that's right? Is that correct? What people find, or what studies have shown, is that the way people treat each other in the company itself is the way that people end up treating clients. So if your boss yells at you and is rude to you, or you yell at somebody and rude to them, that's the way people in a lot of cases treat their customers and their clients. And so it's very important that courtesy and that behavior begins in the workplace when you're there together. So this is what I was just saying. The reality is that's the way your customers and your clients are going to get treated, whatever atmosphere you've got at work. Thoughts? Tell me, have you ever been in a situation, let me hear from you, have you ever been in a situation where you felt like that there could be more courtesy in your organization? So what are some examples of things that you see as a lack of courtesy? Yes.
Well, it's not more so lack of courtesy, but I have a summer job at Disney, and one of our 4 key elements is courtesy. So we go through like a training program for like 3 days where they teach us like courtesy is one of their top things, and you have to be courteous because when you come to Magic Kingdom, you're coming for a magical moment. So that's one thing that they really instill in all their employees, right. And you see that with all the employees there, that they are courteous, because if you're not, you can lose your job.
Yeah, okay. So they see it as very important. Mm-hmm. All right. Anything else? Anybody else? Yes.
Like when your boss asks you to do something, it would just be nice for him to say thank you.
And
even though it's not really necessary, but then a thank you would do, or please, or something.
Yes, absolutely. Please and thank you. I mean, I'm just amazed that. Why is that so hard to say?
I have no idea.
Well, let me tell you a little story about when I was writing my book, and it was approved. They assigned an editor to me. Now, this is a company out of New York, and they assigned an editor to me to help me, make suggestions and say, this chapter's too long, this chapter's too short. And so they got this woman that they assigned to me. She and I were not on the same page at all. And one of the chapters in my book is about saying thank you. I call it your gratitude attitude. Are you grateful for when people do things to you, for you, not to you? And so she started taking a lot of license with what I was writing. She wasn't just fixing things. She was rewriting things and adding paragraphs. And here's one of the paragraphs that she added that put me over the edge. She said, it was all about saying thank you. She said, of course you wouldn't say thank you to the waiter who brings your dinner or to the teacher who teaches your child for doing things because that's their job. And I called her boss and I said, are you kidding me? Do you honestly think I'm going to let something like that be in a book with my name on it? I said, that's not even in my universe. That you would not thank people, even if it is their job. That you would not thank people for doing something for you and for a lot of times making an extra effort. And then I said, which maybe wasn't the most courteous thing, I said, tell her if she wants to write her own book to get busy. And so that was the last problem I had. After that, it was she edited rather than tried to compose. What?
No, I was just adding.
What's that?
No, I was just saying adding on to your stuff.
I'm sorry, what?
I was just saying what you were going to say. Like, instead of like just editing shows, adding stuff. So
Yeah,
I
I
was
know.
just talking to myself.
Yeah, that's okay. I do that all the time. So think about how being rude, if you are the person who's being rude, we've been talking about being the receiver, but how does it, when you're rude to someone, when you cut somebody off in traffic or you yell at somebody or lose your temper, how does it make you feel?
At the moment, it make you feel a little better.
You're absolutely right. But then what happens?
You reconsider over time and make it feel worse.
Well, yeah, and you wish you hadn't done it. But not only that, it takes a lot of energy. To really get mad at somebody and to go out of your way to be rude to them takes a lot more energy in a lot of cases than being nice to them. And so I know I've said a lot about, yes, sir.
So I just wanted to find out, how do you get all your frustration back? I mean, you can't just go and punch a wall or something.
No, well, I exercise. I go, get on the treadmill or go out on the street and run. And I'm serious, I do talk to myself. I'll just maybe choose somebody out, but they're not there. I do it in the car a lot. And the nice thing about having hands-free car phones is now people think I'm talking on the phone. They don't realize when they see me just yammering away that I'm talking to myself. But yeah, I think some people write it down. Some people will write things down, all their frustrations about something. Now that doesn't mean that you can't ever respond to somebody, particularly if they're out of line. But you can still do it in a way that doesn't lower you to their level. Because here's what happens. If I say something to you that really makes you angry, and you respond to me, and you get loud and you respond to me, and you tell me what a crazy person you think I am, then what do I feel? I'm obligated to do what? Take it up a notch. I'm obligated to escalate. And when I escalate, then you escalate. And so what people have found, and we'll see this in just a minute, if you can stay really calm, you'll calm the other person down. Is that it's hard to rant and rave at somebody who won't rant and rave back at you. And so it's found, and we'll see what that is in just a minute. But but what about this guy? We've been talking about how courtesy gets you ahead. You can't see him very well, but he's a real tough-looking customer. And what about all these people who we know are really obnoxious people, but they're very successful? And we know that they're there. We know that they're out there. And we look at them and we think, well, what's all this about etiquette and professionalism when this is the rudest man I've ever known and he runs $1 billion company? But one of the things that, and I actually, when I went through my certification for emotional intelligence, I asked that question. I said, we're talking about being emotionally intelligent, and we'll talk about that on Wednesday, and we've spent a lot of time talking about that. But what about the guy who seems to treat everybody like dirt and is more and more successful? And the answer was, there's still a lot of those out there, but they really seem to, they're on the decline because people won't tolerate it. People used to tolerate it because they felt like they had to, and they don't anymore. And so the person who rules by intimidation, the person who's a bully, the person who doesn't have back and forth adult kind of dialogue are really people who are not probably going to be in the next generation of leaders to a great extent. There's a book, speaking of leadership, there's a book that was written in the late 90s by a gentleman by the name of Jim Collins, and the name of the book was Good to Great. And he talked about how a company can go from being a good company to being a great company. And he said that one of the ways that you did that is you were led by people that he called level 5 leaders. And he said he talked about level 4 leaders and level 5 leaders. The level 4 leaders are the guys you see on the cover of Fortune magazine, and they're always interviewing on MSNBC or CNBC or whatever. The level 5 leaders are people who are very strong, but they exhibit personal humility. They are the quieter leader, and one of the things that he said that really stuck with me is that they look in the mirror to place blame, and they look out the window to give credit. So they're interested in giving credit to other people and taking responsibility when things go wrong. And they're the people who can take companies from good to great. This was back to that article that I told you earlier. How can you increase your CQ or your courtesy quotient? Well, one of the things that people, when they polled a number of people, this was in Great Britain, they wanted respect for others' time, we talked about earlier, and what did you say earlier? Please and thank you. Just take the time to have to insert these little courtesies into your conversation. Here are a few small things that you can do. Treat people at all levels of an organization with the same level of respect. David Ogilvy, who used to be the head of Ogilvy and Mather, one of the largest advertising and PR firms in the world, before he ever hired anybody, after he had interviewed that person, he would go out and sit down on his secretary's desk and say, "What did you think about this person?" And if she said, "I thought he was a jerk," that person didn't ever get that job. If she said, "He was very nice, he introduced himself, he treated me with respect," that was a big plus as far as he was concerned. You know, a lot of times we think we pick and choose the people who matter. Everybody matters. And you never know who's going to be your best ally in a situation. People want you to be able to, if you're in a meeting, have a goal and stay on topic. A lot of what my research said, don't waste people's time. Avoid interrupting. Respond to your emails within 24 hours if you can. One of the things that I use a lot is what I call a bridge email. And a bridge email is when I'm swamped and I get an email from somebody who needs an answer about something. I'll shoot back an email that said, "I got your email. I can't deal with it right now. I will get back to you in the next couple of days." And then I flag it so that it reminds me in a couple of days that I need to deal with that email. Be sure that you are in the moment, that you focus on the conversation that's going on right now. And when you make a mistake, don't think that it makes you less of a leader or less of a person to apologize. it does just the opposite. People think more of you when you are willing to admit your failures. So what about in the office? What are the things that drive you crazy working in an office that people do? What are some of the things that you would say keep people from being a good office citizen? Talking loudly on the phone, absolutely. That's one of the biggest complaints. What else?
Entering someone's workspace, but like watching them over their shoulder.
Okay, entering their workspace, intruding, because in cubicles, people don't have offices with doors on them as much as they used to. We do have workspace, and you can walk in. What else? Yes?
Yeah, when they don't listen to why you do some stuff.
When they don't listen to
your reasons.
To your reasons, absolutely. Anything else?
Maybe in like an environment where there's like a kitchen or something.
Yes. The two biggest complaints about in our cubicle world, the two biggest complaints are noise and what?
Kitchen cleanliness.
But what else? Besides just the cleanliness.
Oh, eating people's food, yes.
What about it? Smells, yes. Noise and smells are the two biggest complaints that you get from people in the office. In fact, we've got a sign up on the 13th floor in our break room that says, "Do not heat fish in this microwave anymore." I don't know what happened, but they said there's a vending room down on the 3rd floor. So if you're going to heat fish, go to the 3rd floor. So evidently there must have been a real disaster there. I'm glad I wasn't there that day. So what are some other things that you can do? Just little things that help things run smoothly at an office. Well, put it back. When you use it, put it back, whatever it is. And this is one of the things I struggle with all the time, because once I've used it, I'm done. I practically just drop it where it is, staplers and so forth. Another thing is, if you've used the last of anything, if you're in the position where you can replenish it, fine, but if you're not, at least let the appropriate person know. Refill the paper tray. Reset the copier so the next person who runs the copier doesn't end up running 50 copies when they only wanted one. Most copiers reset themselves nowadays, but if you are in a situation where it doesn't. Humor is a great way to help people get along in stressful situations. But remember that humor can offend as well as it can entertain, and humor doesn't always translate across language. What's funny in our one language may not be funny if somebody tries to translate it. So it's what we.
Oh, no, I was just agreeing with you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I'll tell you where you're always safe is if you make yourself the brunt of the joke. As long as you're joking about yourself, you're not going to offend anybody in most cases. You're pretty on safe ground then. And then when you need to help, pitch in. And I think that's a great example of people who are really confident about themselves. Several years ago, we added a little space onto our house. And I had to go buy some doors and windows. And it happened to be that I had been in graduate school with a woman whose husband had started a door and window company that he sold to builders, the frames and so forth. And so I said, well, I'd like to do business with them because he started his company. I think he's doing pretty well, and I'd like to support somebody I know. So we went out to their company. It was out in Marietta, and we went out to their company to pick out some doors and windows. And I asked one of the people who was there, I said, is Robert here today? And he said, no, he's not here. He's over at our office over in Gwinnett County. And I said, well, I'm really sorry. I know his wife real well. We were in graduate school together, and I had hoped I'd get a chance to see him. He's a nice guy. He said, the thing about Robert, he said, when he's here and we're busy, whatever needs doing, Robert does it. He said, I saw him the other day, and this company had gotten pretty successful by then. He said, I saw him the other day walking around emptying the garbage cans, the trash cans in people's offices because we were working on something and the trash cans were getting really full. He says he does that kind of thing all the time. If the floor needs sweeping, he sweeps it. If he needs to make copies for somebody, he does it. In addition to running the company, he said, quite frankly, everybody in this office would follow that guy anywhere because of the example that he set by not being the boss. There was no doubt in anybody's mind he was the boss, so he didn't have to go around acting like it. So he pitched in and helped when needed. Make sure that when you are courteous and when you do all these things, that your motives are pure, that you're not just, that's when it becomes sucking up, is when you only are nice to someone or you only treat someone well because you want something from them. So treat others the way that they would like to be treated. You know, there's the golden rule which says, do unto others as what? As you would want. The platinum rule is treat them the way they want to be treated. One of the things that Goleman says is that what we talked about earlier, if you refuse to return rudeness, remember the escalation thing I just talked about. He says the person who is unflappable or calm will almost always end up calming the excited person down. And in fact, what he says is there is this tiny little thing in the base of our brain called the amygdala, and it controls our anger and response to this kind of thing. And he says that if you can keep yours under control, that you're going to settle the other person down as well. I thought that was kind of an interesting point. One great book I read on treating people the way that you should is called The Carrot Principle. Have you heard about the carrot and the stick? What does that mean? What do you do with a horse or a donkey? What's the old, that you have the carrot out there to make him, you know, the idea was you used to have the carrot out there with to make him follow it. So the carrot was the positive motivation. And he writes on the carrot principle is that you need to make sure that when you're dealing with people, your body language is positive. And what he suggests is in the office is the very first thing that you need to talk to the people with whom you work about something other than work. Why do you think that's important? What does that do?
Builds rapport.
It builds rapport. It establishes those relationships. Provide on-the-spot recognition to people. And he said when somebody does something good, don't wait till their year-end performance review. He says there are three steps. Number one, tell them what they did that was really good. Describe it specifically. Number two, let them know what was the effect. Thank you so much for handling that irate customer. She went away happy. She'll be back to buy things from us again. And number three, please know how much I appreciate the fact that you did it. You know, that's an easy thing to do if we just think about it. We just get busy and we don't always think about it. Here's some times when this kind of behavior that we're talking about can really pay dividends for you. When you're getting started on a new job, when you have to leave a job that you've been working on, you don't want to burn any bridges or damage relationships. When you're leading across cultures, they will pay big dividends for you. There's a lot in it for you. This isn't all about just doing for other people. Obviously, etiquette is all about how you respond and react to others, but there's a lot in it that's going to pay big dividends for you. In fact, Dana Mae Person said, good manners open doors that power and money cannot. Here's one of the things, an exercise. How many of you work or in addition to being in school, are working in offices? Are you all in school or none in school? Everybody working?
Mostly college.
What?
Part-time jobs.
Pardon?
Part-time jobs.
Part-time jobs, okay. Or do you, tell me some of the places you're in school.
Here.
You're here. Didn't some people come from other places?
Ohio State.
Ohio State, a Buckeye, okay. All right, anybody else?
Virginia.
Delaware? When you go back home, what I want you to do is ask a few of your peers or if you're working people at work, ask them to use 3 words they would use to describe you. Nobody's going to say anything bad. You know, it's going to be complimentary. 3 words that you would like for people to use to describe you. And ask 2 or 3 people and see if those are the words that you really would like for them to say about it. That's the way you want to come across to other people. I do a good bit of executive coaching, and I do this with all my coaching clients if I'm working with someone. And there was one young man not too long ago that I did this with. He's a director in a manufacturing company, and he wants to be a vice president, and one of these days he wants to run his own company. And so I asked him to do this with his coworkers. And he brought me the list of all the names that they had, all the words they had used to describe him. And I said, what were some of them? And he said, well, they said funny and smart and 2 or 3 other things. He is very smart. And I said, are you happy about the words? And he said, well, they were all nice. They were all very positive. I said, here's what I want you to do. I want you to look and see, are there any words that you wish were there that aren't? And he said, yes, nobody said leader. And he said, nobody said driven or ambitious. And I said, how do you feel about the fact that almost everybody said you were funny? And he said, you know, I'm glad you mentioned that. He said, I think it's important to have a good sense of humor, but I don't want people to think I'm a clown. And he said, I need to think, I need to go back and ask myself, why is that the 1 or 2 words that first come to somebody's mind when they describe me? He said, I really want to give that some thought. But I would challenge you to do this exercise because you can figure out, is this the image that I want to present? And am I establishing myself in the way that I want to? Because courtesy and executive level courtesy can actually create a huge edge for you. Okay, take a minute and fill out that little quiz, and then we're going to go over those. Everybody got one, right? It's just multiple choice. You can go through it really quickly. Don't overthink it. You're not going to get a grade. me tell you what I think I'm gonna do. We're coming up against the next session, and I think you all probably need a little bit of a break. You will finish this and bring it Wednesday. We'll go over it first thing Wednesday before we start talking about emotional intelligence. Is that fair? Okay. So we can go over the, don't forget to finish it though. And then we'll talk about it first thing Wednesday morning. So that way you'll have time to think about it, because we probably need to go over these a little bit and talk about the whys and why not. Some of them, you could do more than one answer. And so we'll talk about what you think is the best one for that situation. So make sure you bring it back. Okay? Bring it back on Wednesday morning. When do we start? Barry, 8 o'clock Wednesday?
8 o'clock.
Wow, that's early. 8 o'clock. All right, so I will see you then on Wednesday morning. We'll finish up this. We'll talk about emotional intelligence. I think you're going to find that extremely interesting. When you talk about something that will give you an edge as you move forward, this is going to be a huge benefit to help you really position yourself for great things. I've enjoyed being with you all today. Can they have about, they start again at 4?
Yes, so they can have a couple minutes to...
Yeah, so you've got about a 10-minute break. So I'll see you Wednesday. Don't forget to bring this. There may be a prize involved. Okay, y'all get up and move around.